Sarah's sneakers pounded the sidewalk. Her babysitting job started 15 minutes ago. Mrs. Davison was probably already annoyed. Sarah clutched her phone, glancing at the time again. Late, late, late. Why did her little brother have to hide her favorite bracelet? She imagined Mrs. Davison's pursed lips and the way she tapped her foot. Sarah really needed this job. It was her only way to earn money for the new art supplies she wanted. Watercolors weren't cheap. A red pickup truck rumbled to a stop beside her. It was Mr. Henderson, her dad's friend. He was always tinkering with cars in his garage. He had kind eyes and a friendly smile, but Sarah still felt a little awkward around him. He was so much older. "Need a ride, Sarah?" he called out, his voice a little raspy. "I saw you running. You look like you're about to miss a train." Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to bother him, but the Davisons' house was still several blocks away. And she was so late. Yes, please, Mr. Henderson. That would be amazing. I'm really late for babysitting." She hurried around the truck and hopped in, buckling her seatbelt. Maybe, just maybe, she could still salvage the evening. The inside of the truck smelled like old leather and motor oil, a familiar scent from her dad's own garage. A worn-out baseball cap sat on the dashboard, and a couple of CDs were scattered on the floor. It was definitely an older truck, but it seemed well-loved. Sarah adjusted her skirt as she settled into the seat. It was a little shorter than she usually wore, but it was the only clean one she could find this morning. She hoped Mrs. Davison wouldn't think it was inappropriate. Mr. Henderson put the truck in gear, and they rumbled down the street. The engine was loud, and Sarah had to speak up to be heard. "Thank you so much for this, Mr. Henderson. I really appreciate it." "No problem at all, Sarah," he said with a smile. "Happy to help. Your dad would have my hide if I left you stranded." He chuckled, and Sarah smiled back, feeling a little more at ease. Maybe this wouldn't be so awkward after all. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was a little off. He seemed to be looking at her a bit strangely, but maybe it was just her imagination. She focused on getting to Mrs. Davison's as quickly as possible. "So, how's school going, Sarah?" Mr. Henderson asked, his eyes on the road. "It's okay," Sarah replied. "It's almost the end of the year, so everyone's getting a little crazy. Lots of tests and projects." "I remember those days," Mr. Henderson chuckled. "Seems like a lifetime ago." "What about the Davison kids?" he continued. "Are they well behaved?" "Mostly," Sarah said, smiling. "Little Timmy likes to build forts out of the couch cushions, but he's usually pretty good. And Lily loves to draw, so we spend a lot of time coloring." Mr. Henderson nodded. "Sounds like a good gig. Your parents must be glad you're earning some money." "Yeah, they are," Sarah said. "It helps out with things, and I'm saving up for art supplies." The conversation flowed easily. Mr. Henderson seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. He asked about her favorite subjects in school and what she liked to draw. For a few minutes, Sarah forgot about being late and the strange feeling she had earlier. He really did seem like just a friendly, normal guy. Maybe she was just being paranoid. But as they drove further, the easy conversation started to fade. The silences grew longer, and Sarah noticed Mr. Henderson's glances becoming more frequent and lingering a little too long. The knot in her stomach tightened again. The silence in the truck felt heavy now, unlike the comfortable quiet from before. Sarah stared out the window, focusing on the passing houses and trees. She tried to ignore the way Mr. Henderson's eyes kept flicking over to her. Each glance felt like a tiny pinprick, adding to her growing unease. She shifted in her seat, pulling her skirt down a little further. Was it her imagination, or was he looking at her differently than he had before? She cleared her throat, trying to break the tension. "Mrs. Davison said they might be going out to dinner tonight, so I'll probably just be putting the kids to bed." Mr. Henderson just grunted in response, his eyes still fixed on her for a moment before returning to the road. The grunt wasn't unfriendly, but it wasn't engaged either. Sarah's heart started to beat faster. She wished she hadn't accepted the ride. She should have just kept running, even if she was late. Now she was trapped in this truck with a man who was starting to make her feel really uncomfortable. She tried to think of something else to say, anything to fill the silence and change the atmosphere, but her mind was blank. She just wanted to get to the Davisons' house. Now, just when Sarah thought the silence couldn't get any worse, Mr. Henderson spoke. "That's a pretty skirt, Sarah," he said, his voice sounding thick and different than before. "It really suits you." Sarah's stomach dropped. It wasn't just the words themselves, but the way he said them, the way his eyes lingered on her legs. It felt wrong, inappropriate. A wave of heat flushed her face, and she instinctively crossed her arms over her chest. She mumbled a thank you, trying to keep her voice steady. She hated this. She wanted to disappear. Mr. Henderson didn't say anything more, but the silence that followed was even more suffocating than before. Sarah's mind raced. What should she do? Should she say something? Should she try to change the subject? Every option felt risky. The knot in her stomach tightened into a hard, painful ball. She squeezed her hands together in her lap, trying to control her breathing. She just needed to get out of this truck. Now, the Davisons' house was just around the corner. Please, she thought, please let us be there soon. She glanced at Mr. Henderson. His expression was unreadable. The truck rumbled to a stop in front of the Davisons' house. Relief washed over Sarah, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of anxiety. Mr. Henderson turned off the engine, and the sudden silence felt even more intense than before. Sarah's hand hovered over the door handle, but she didn't reach for it. Something felt wrong. Too fast. She needed a moment to think, to plan. Just jumping out of the truck felt incomplete. She glanced at the house. It looked normal, safe. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to handle this situation carefully. She couldn't just run away and pretend it didn't happen. That wouldn't solve anything. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She needed to be smart. She needed to be in control. She couldn't show Mr. Henderson how scared she was. That would only make things worse. Instead of reaching for the handle, she kept her hand in her lap, clenched into a fist. She looked straight ahead for another moment, gathering her thoughts. Then, slowly, deliberately, she turned to face Mr. Henderson. Sarah knew she couldn't just ignore what had happened. Running away wouldn't make the uncomfortable feeling go away, and it wouldn't teach Mr. Henderson that his comment was wrong. But confronting him directly felt too scary. She needed a different approach. She decided to try and defuse the tension by talking. Maybe if she could get him to see her as a person, as more than just a girl in a skirt, he would realize his mistake. She needed to regain control of the situation, and conversation felt like the safest way to do that. She thought about what she could say. Something neutral, something that would shift the focus away from her appearance. Something that would remind him that she was a person with thoughts and feelings, just like him. It was a risky plan, but it was the best she could come up with in the moment. She hoped it would work. She hoped she could find the right words to make him understand. She hoped she could get out of this truck without things getting any worse. Her babysitting job was the last thing on her mind right now. Her safety was the only thing that mattered. Taking a deep breath, Sarah turned to Mr. Henderson, forcing a smile onto her face. It felt stiff and unnatural, but she hoped it would be enough to disarm him. She needed to appear calm and in control, even though her insides were churning with anxiety. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice sounding surprisingly steady. "Why don't we just sit for a while?" The words hung in the air, a deliberate stall tactic. She needed to buy herself some time to figure out her next move. She watched his face carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. Was he surprised? Confused? Disappointed? It was hard to tell. Her smile wavered slightly, but she held it in place. She had to project confidence, even if she didn't feel it. She had to make him believe that she was in control of the situation. The silence stretched out between them, thick and heavy. Sarah held her breath, waiting for his response. Every second felt like an eternity. She could hear the distant sound of children playing, a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere inside the truck. She hoped Mrs. Davison wasn't watching from the window, wondering why she wasn't coming in. All she could do was wait and see what Mr. Henderson would say. Before Mr. Henderson could respond, Sarah launched into her plan. "So, Mr. Henderson," she began, keeping her tone light and respectful, Dad was telling me the other day that you're working on restoring an old car. That sounds really interesting. What kind is it? She watched as his expression shifted, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. He hadn't expected this. Good. She was throwing him off balance. It's a '67 Mustang, he said, a hint of pride creeping into his voice. Been working on it for years. It's a real labor of love. Wow, a Mustang. That's amazing, Sarah said, genuinely impressed. Dad said you're really good with cars. Did you always like working on them? She continued to pepper him with questions, steering the conversation away from anything personal or potentially uncomfortable. She asked about his family, his hobbies, his work. She listened attentively, nodding and making encouraging noises. She kept her voice friendly and engaging, as if this were just a normal, everyday conversation. She knew it was a gamble, but she hoped that by focusing on him, she could remind him of her connection to his friend, her dad, and make him see her as a person worthy of respect. The key was to keep talking, to keep the focus on him, and to keep the atmosphere light and non-threatening. With each question, with each interested nod, Sarah felt the power dynamic subtly shifting. Before, she had felt like a trapped animal, vulnerable and scared. Now, she was the one asking the questions, the one directing the conversation. She was in control. Mr. Henderson, initially taken aback by her sudden interest, seemed to relax a little. He started to talk more freely, his voice losing some of its earlier tension. He seemed genuinely pleased that she was interested in his Mustang and his other projects. Sarah noticed that his gaze, which had been so unsettling before, now seemed more focused on her face, on her eyes, as he answered her questions. He was seeing her, really seeing her, as a person. She continued to steer the conversation, carefully avoiding any topics that might lead back to uncomfortable territory. She asked about his grandchildren, about his favorite kinds of music, about his garden. She kept the tone light and friendly, making him feel comfortable and respected. The shift in power wasn't dramatic, but it was noticeable. Sarah no longer felt like she was at Mr. Henderson's mercy. She had found a way to take charge of the situation, to protect herself without being confrontational. She was using her words as a shield, and it seemed to be working. As Sarah continued to steer the conversation, she noticed a subtle shift in Mr. Henderson. He seemed to become uncomfortable. Not in the same way she had been, but more like he was realizing the implications of his earlier behavior. He fidgeted in his seat, avoiding eye contact. His answers became shorter, less detailed. He seemed eager to change the subject, but Sarah gently persisted, keeping the focus on his life and his experiences. She could see the wheels turning in his head. He was starting to understand. He was realizing that she wasn't just some random girl, that she was a person with connections and a life of her own. He was recognizing the inappropriateness of his earlier comment. Sarah pressed on, asking about his wife, his children, his grandchildren. She wanted to make him see her as someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone who deserved respect. The more she talked, the more uncomfortable he seemed to become. It was as if he was finally realizing the gravity of the situation, the potential consequences of his actions. Sarah felt a flicker of relief. Her plan was working. He was starting to understand. And that understanding was making him squirm. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and sincerity. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and hesitant. I wanted to apologize for what I said earlier about your skirt. It was inappropriate, and I'm really sorry if it made you uncomfortable." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I was just trying to be friendly, to pay you a compliment, but I realize now that it came out wrong. I overstepped. And I truly didn't mean to make you feel that way." Sarah nodded slowly, acknowledging his apology. She could see the sincerity in his eyes. She believed that he was genuinely sorry. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice softer now. "I appreciate you saying that." She still felt a little uneasy, but the tension in the truck had definitely lessened. His apology had made a difference. It had validated her feelings and acknowledged his mistake. She knew that words alone couldn't erase what had happened, but it was a start. It was a step in the right direction. And it gave her hope that he had truly learned a lesson. Now, she just needed to figure out how to end the encounter gracefully. Sarah took a deep breath and met Mr. Henderson's gaze. She wanted to make sure he understood the importance of what he had said and what he had learned. "Thank you for apologizing, Mr. Henderson," she said calmly. "It means a lot. I think it's really important for everyone to remember to respect boundaries, no matter how old they are or who they're talking to." She paused, choosing her words carefully. She didn't want to sound preachy or accusatory, but she also wanted to make her point clear. Sometimes, she continued, things that might seem like compliments can make other people feel uncomfortable. It's important to think about how your words might affect someone else. She offered him a small, genuine smile. "I appreciate you understanding that." By accepting his apology gracefully and emphasizing the importance of respecting boundaries, Sarah was reinforcing the lesson he had hopefully learned. She was also demonstrating her own maturity and strength. She wasn't just a victim. She was a young woman who knew her worth and was willing to stand up for herself in a calm and respectful way. Now it was time to go. She had a babysitting job to do, and she had handled a difficult situation with grace and courage. Mr. Henderson nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You're right, Sarah," he said. "I appreciate you pointing that out. I guess I wasn't really thinking. I need to be more mindful of how I talk to younger people." He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Thank you for handling this so well. You could have gotten angry or scared, but you kept your cool and helped me understand where I went wrong. That took a lot of maturity." He looked at her with genuine respect. "This has been a real learning moment for me. I won't make that mistake again." Sarah felt a surge of relief. It was over. He had understood. He had learned. And she had handled it with grace and courage. She realized that even though the situation had been uncomfortable and scary, it had also been empowering. She had found her voice, stood up for herself, and helped someone else learn a valuable lesson. She was proud of herself. "It's okay, Mr. Henderson," she said with a smile. "I'm glad we could talk about it." Now, she really needed to get to that babysitting job. Mrs. Davison was probably wondering where she was. Sarah finally reached for the door handle, a genuine smile on her face this time. She felt lighter, freer than she had in what seemed like hours. The heavy weight that had been pressing down on her chest had lifted. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Henderson," she said sincerely. "I really appreciate it." She hopped out of the truck, feeling the warm sun on her face. The fresh air filled her lungs, chasing away the stale smell of leather and motor oil. She stretched, feeling the tension leaving her body. She turned back to Mr. Henderson, who was watching her with a sheepish grin. "Have a good evening," she said. "You too, Sarah," he replied. "And be careful." She nodded and turned towards the Davisons' front door. As she walked, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had faced a difficult situation and handled it with grace and intelligence. She had protected herself, stood up for herself, and helped someone else learn a valuable lesson. She was still late for her babysitting job, but somehow, that didn't seem so important anymore. She had learned something far more valuable today. She had learned that she was strong, capable, and worthy of respect. And that was a lesson she would carry with her always. She rang the doorbell, ready to face whatever the evening might bring. She was safe, relieved, and empowered. Mrs. Davison opened the door, a slightly exasperated look on her face. "Sarah, you're almost an hour late. I was starting to worry." "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Davison," Sarah said, offering her most sincere apology. "I got held up. It won't happen again." She decided not to go into the details of her delay. It was enough that she was here now, safe and ready to work. Mrs. Davison softened, seeing the genuine remorse in Sarah's eyes. "Well, never mind. I'm just glad you're here. The kids are already in their pajamas. Lily's been asking for you to read her a story." Sarah smiled, relieved that Mrs. Davison wasn't too angry. She followed her inside, breathing in the familiar scent of cookies and crayons. As she settled into her babysitting duties, Reading stories to Lily and helping Timmy build a tower of blocks, Sarah couldn't help but feel grateful. Grateful that she had handled the situation with Mr. Henderson effectively, grateful that she was safe, and grateful that she had the opportunity to earn some money for her art supplies. The earlier tension faded into the background as she focused on the children. She knew she would never forget what had happened in Mr. Henderson's truck, but she also knew that it didn't have to define her. She was strong, she was capable, and she was in control of her own life. And tonight, she was a babysitter, making sure two little kids had a fun and safe evening. Later that night, after the kids were asleep and Mrs. Davison had returned home, Sarah sat on the couch, flipping through a magazine. The house was quiet and peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil she had experienced earlier. She couldn't help but replay the events of the evening in her mind. It had been scary, no doubt about it. There had been moments when she had felt truly vulnerable and afraid. But as she reflected on the experience, she realized that she had handled it in a smart and safe way. She hadn't panicked. She hadn't run away. She had used her words, her intelligence, and her courage to navigate a difficult situation and come out on top. She had stood up for herself without being confrontational. She had asserted her boundaries without being aggressive. She had helped someone else learn a valuable lesson without sacrificing her own safety or well-being. She was proud of herself. She had faced her fear and found her voice. She had discovered a strength within herself that she didn't even know she possessed. She realized that even though bad things could happen, even though people could sometimes behave inappropriately, she had the power to protect herself and to make a difference. And that was a lesson she would never forget. She closed the magazine, a sense of quiet confidence settling over her. She was ready to go home. When Sarah got home, her dad was waiting up for her, reading in the living room. He looked up, concern etched on his face. "Hey, sweetie," he said. Mrs. Davison called. "Said you were really late. Everything okay?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. She didn't want to worry him, but she also knew she couldn't keep the incident a secret. He deserved to know what had happened. She sat down beside him on the couch and took a deep breath. "I'm okay, Dad," she said. "But something a little weird happened tonight." She told him about Mr. Henderson offering her a ride, about the awkward conversation, and about the inappropriate comment he had made. She focused on how she had handled the situation, how she had used conversation to defuse the tension, and how Mr. Henderson had eventually apologized. She emphasized that she had felt safe and in control throughout the entire encounter. She also made sure to mention that Mr. Henderson seemed genuinely sorry for his actions. She watched her dad's face carefully, gauging his reaction. He listened intently, his brow furrowed with concern. When she finished, he was silent for a moment, processing what she had told him. Sarah held her breath, waiting for him to speak. She knew this was a difficult situation for him too. Mr. Henderson was his friend. Finally, he spoke, his voice filled with pride. "Sarah, I am so incredibly proud of you," he said, pulling her into a hug. "You handled that situation with so much maturity and intelligence. I can't believe how well you stood up for yourself." He paused, his expression turning serious. "What Mr. Henderson said was not okay. Not at all. And I'm glad he apologized, but I need to talk to him about this. Man to man." He pulled back from the hug, looking her in the eye. "I'm not going to yell at him or anything like that. But I need to make sure he understands how serious this was and that it can never happen again." Sarah nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. She knew her dad would do the right thing. He wouldn't let Mr. Henderson get away with his behavior, but he also wouldn't overreact or make the situation worse. "I trust you, Dad," she said. "I know you'll handle it well." He smiled, squeezing her hand. "Thanks, sweetie. Now, get some sleep. You've had a long day." Sarah got up and headed towards her room, feeling a sense of peace and closure. She knew her dad would take care of everything. She could finally relax and let go of the stress of the evening. She was safe, she was loved, and she was supported. The next day, Sarah's dad had a long conversation with Mr. Henderson. He explained how Mr. Henderson's words had made Sarah feel, and he emphasized the importance of respecting boundaries, especially when interacting with younger people. Mr. Henderson listened intently, his face etched with remorse. He apologized again, promising that he would never make such a mistake again. He understood the seriousness of his actions and was grateful that Sarah had handled the situation with such maturity. Life returned to normal for Sarah. She continued to babysit the Davison kids, and she continued to pursue her love of art. But she carried with her the knowledge that she was strong, capable, and worthy of respect. She had learned how to stand up for herself in a smart and safe way, and that was a lesson she would never forget. Mr. Henderson, too, had learned a valuable lesson. He became more mindful of his interactions with others, especially younger people. He understood the power of words and the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity. The story concludes with a sense of resolution. Sarah felt confident and empowered, knowing that she could handle difficult situations with grace and courage. Mr. Henderson had learned a valuable lesson about respect and communication, and the importance of speaking up, of setting boundaries, and of treating everyone with kindness and understanding was highlighted for all.